When you hear the name Henry Ford, you probably think of the Model T, the assembly line, maybe even the Mustang or the F 150. Ford is an American icon. He made cars affordable, reshaped industry, and became one of the richest men in the world. But there's another side to Ford's story, one that doesn't fit so neatly in the history books. It's the story of how one of America's greatest industrialists became one of the world's most influential anti Semites, and how his words would echo all the way to Adolf Hitler's Germany. Henry Ford was born in 1863 on a Michigan farm. He worked his way into engineering, founded the Ford Motor Company in 1903, and by 1908, the Model T had hit the road. 10 years later, half of all cars in America were Model Ts. Ford wasn't just a businessman anymore. He was a celebrity, a man whose word carried weight. And that's when he started using that weight to push something much darker. By the late 1910s, Ford was already speaking openly about his beliefs in a worldwide Jewish conspiracy. A friend kept a diary of a camping trip in 1919. Around the campfire, Ford ranted for hours. The Jews caused the war. The Jews caused the outbreak of thievery and robbery all over the country. The Jews caused the inefficiency of the Navy. This wasn't an offhand remark. It was the core of his worldwide view. And soon, he had a much bigger microphone to spread it. In 1920, Ford bought a struggling local newspaper, the Dearborn Independent. Under his control, it became a megaphone for his anti Semitism. Week after week, it ran articles blaming Jews from everything to Wall Street manipulation to the spread of jazz music. The paper's most infamous series, The International Jew, the world's foremost problem, ran for 91 installments. It was translated into multiple languages and distributed worldwide. And much of it relied on the Protocol of the Learned Elders of Zion, a Russian forgery claiming to reveal a Jewish plan for world domination. Even though it had been debunked, Ford pushed it as truth. In 1927, Ford faced a liable lawsuit from a Jewish lawyer named Aaron Shapiro. He issued a public apology, claiming he didn't know what was being printed, and promised it would stop. But behind closed doors, his views never changed. He still blamed Jewish financiers for the Great Depression and the New Deal. He still believed another war was coming and that Jews were behind it. Ford's writings crossed the Atlantic. In Germany, a rising political figure named Adolf Hitler was reading The International Jew. In Mein Kampf, Hitler praised Ford by name as the only American who was a single great man, resisting Jewish influence. Nazi officials displayed Ford's portrait. Nazi propaganda cited his newspaper articles as proof. And in 1938, 1 year before World War II broke out, the Nazi regime awarded Henry Ford the Grand Cross of the German Eagle, the highest honor they could give to a foreign citizen. By then, the Ford Motor Company had a German subsidiary, Ford Works, in Cologne. Under Nazi rule, Jewish managers were fired. Hiring followed racial criteria. The company sought to stay in the good graces of the regime, but eventually the Nazis took full control. During the war, Ford Works produced tanks for the Wehrmacht and used forced labor from concentration camps. Henry Ford never co signed a car ad with Adolf Hitler. He never stood on a Nazi stage, but his anti Semitic ideas, printed in hundreds of thousands of copies, gave legitimacy to Nazi propaganda. And the admiration, it went both ways. Hitler saw in Ford a model of how industry and ideology could work hand in hand. Today, Ford is remembered as a genius of manufacturing, but also as a cautionary tale. Because when a man with a platform as big as his chooses hate, the echoes can cross oceans. Remember, the danger isn't just in people who act, it's in the people who inspire them. We explored how Henry Ford's anti Semitic worldview and how his paper, The Dearborn Independent, turned the prejudice into print. But the story doesn't end in America, because those articles, compiled into 4 volumes called The International Jew, didn't just circulate in Detroit, they crossed oceans. And in Germany, they became part of the propaganda playbook of the most destructive regime of the 20th century. Ford published The International Jew between 1920 and 1922. Each volume was a collection of articles claiming Jews secretly controlled banks, the press, and even popular culture. The books were widely distributed in the United States. Ford dealerships gave them away for a free car with purchase, but they didn't stop there. By the early 1920s, German translations were circulating in Munich, the hotbed of racial politics where the Nazi Party was taking shape. The timing couldn't have been worse. Germany was reeling from the defeat of World War I. They were drowning in debt, humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles. People were desperate for someone to blame. When Ford's writings landed in Germany, they hit like a match in a dry forest. Nazi newspapers quoted the International Jew as if it were evidence. Pamphlets recycled its claims word for word. Adolf Hitler himself devoured the volumes. In Mein Kampf, published in 1925, he praised Ford directly, calling him a great man who stood up against Jewish influence. And inside the Nazi Party offices, portraits of Henry Ford hung alongside images of German leaders. Ford wasn't just admired, he was idolized. Nazi speeches in the 1920s and 30s regularly cited his works. The Nazi Party official newspaper recommended the International Jew to its readers. Heinrich Himmler's SS library stocked copies. German school curriculum used excerpts from the literature about the Jewish question. For many Nazis, Ford proved that their hatred wasn't just a fringe idea in Germany, it was shared by one of the richest and most famous men in America. In July 1938, Henry Ford's influence came full circle. On his 75th birthday, a German delegation arrived in Michigan to present him with the Grand Cross of the German Eagle, the Nazi Germany's highest honor for a foreign citizen. The medal was pinned on his chest by the German consul in Detroit, with swastikas gleaming on the ribbons. Photographs of the event appeared in newspapers worldwide. It was a clear signal. To Hitler's regime, Ford wasn't just an industrial genius, he was a comrade in ideology. By the time World War II began, the International Jew had been published in at least 16 languages. Nazi officials distributed it throughout occupied Europe as part of their propaganda campaign. One Nazi propaganda chief declared, "The International Jew is Ford's gift to the world. We regard it as a cornerstone of our struggle." Even after the war, copies resurfaced in far-right movements in the US, in the Middle East, and beyond. Ford's words outlived him, continuing to poison the minds long after his death in 1947. Henry Ford built cars that transformed America, but he also built words. Words that helped fuel the deadliest hate movement in history. His legacy is complicated. One part assembly line and innovation, another part conspiracy theories and bigotry. And the echoes of the International Jew remind us of a simple truth. When lies are given the voice of authority, they don't fade, they spread. American businessmen, not just Ford, navigated Nazi Germany in the 1930s. Some resisted, others were complacent, and some profited. But Ford gave us more than cars. He gave them ideas. We've talked about Ford's anti-Semitic writings and how the International Jew found a home inside Hitler's propaganda machine. But Ford's influence on Nazi Germany wasn't just ideological, it was also industrial. Because in Cologne, Germany, Ford's nameplate was stamped onto trucks and engines that helped fuel the Third Reich. This is the story of Ford work. In 1925, Ford Motor Company opened its German subsidiary, Ford Work, in the city of Cologne. The goal was simple: tap into Europe's growing auto market. At first, it was just business, producing small cars, expanding dealerships, building brand recognition. But in 1933, everything changed. That was the year Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party came to power. Like every foreign company in Germany, Ford faced pressure to comply with Nazi policies. To stay in business, Ford Work began making changes. Jewish and foreign managers were dismissed. Hiring practices were altered to fit the Nazi racial ideology and criteria. The company increased its transfer of foreign currency to the regime. It was an uneasy balance. On paper, Ford in America still owned its subsidiary. But in practice, the Nazis were tightening their grip. By the late 1930s, Ford Work was producing trucks, the backbone of the Weimar logistics. Unlike tanks or planes, which took years to build, trucks could be churned out quickly. And Ford's German assembly line were good at just that. By 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, Ford German plants were fully integrated into the Nazi war economy. During the war, Ford Work made thousands of military vehicles. The company reports later admit that, at one point, nearly half of its workforce was forced labor, prisoners of war, civilians taken from occupied countries, and often they were worked under brutal conditions. But did Detroit know? This is where things get murky. How much did Ford headquarters in Detroit know about what was happening in Cologne. Officially, Ford Motor Company claimed it had lost control of the subsidiary once the US had entered the war in 1941. But documents suggest American executives were still receiving reports and profits from the German operation, at least in the early years. After the war in 1945, the US military even found evidence that Ford had worked hand in hand with Nazi officials to keep production flowing. After Germany's defeat, questions arose. Should Ford be punished for aiding the Nazi war machine? Some US officials argued that Ford had essentially collaborated with the enemy. But in 1945, Ford Motor Company claimed it had been powerless, that its German arm had been fully seized by the Nazis. In a twist of irony, Ford later filed claims of damages to its Cologne facility from Allied bombing and was actually compensated. It wasn't until late 1990s, early 2000s, when survivors of forced labor demanded reparations, that Ford's role at Ford Works came under renewed scrutiny. In 2000, Ford joined a German industrial fund that paid compensation to former forced laborers. So where does that leave us? On one hand, Ford Works was just one part of Germany's vast wartime industry. And it's true that Nazis often controlled operations by force. On the other hand, the trucks rolled off of the Cologne assembly line carried German troops into battle. Many were built by prisoners who had no choice. Henry Ford didn't live to see this. He died in 1947. But the company he built was forced to reckon with a legacy that tied its name, however uncomfortably, to the crimes of the Third Reich. In the end, Ford's story isn't about cars or innovation. It's about how ideas in industry can be weaponized. And it's a reminder that business decisions don't happen in a vacuum. They ripple outward, shaping history in a way that lasts far longer than any automobile. Henry Ford's name traveled across the Atlantic, inspiring Adolf Hitler and feeding Nazi propaganda. But his anti Semitic crusade also had a powerful effect much closer to home. Because in the United States, during the 1920s and the 1930s, Ford's words would become ammunition for homegrown hate. This is a story of how Henry Ford, one of America's greatest industrialists, also became a hero to the world's darkest movements. Between 1920 and 1927, Ford's newspaper, the Dearborn Independent, churned out anti-Jewish conspiracy theories. It wasn't just some obscure pamphlet. At its peak, the paper circulated over 700,000 copies, making it one of the most widely read newspapers in America at the time. But those essays were eventually compiled into 4 volumes that we've already talked about, The International Jew. And while libraries and universities criticized it, hate groups embraced it. In the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan surged back to power, not just in the South, but nationwide. To the Klan, Ford was a folk hero. Here was a self-made American billionaire who confirmed what they already believed, that Jews controlled banks, the media, and international politics. Klan leaders urged members to read The International Jew and distribute it alongside their own propaganda. For them, Ford wasn't just an automaker. He was a prophet. Fast forward to 1930s. The Great Depression devastated the US, and extremist movements found new audiences. Groups like the German-American Bund openly marched in New York, waving swastikas. Father Charles Coughlin, the radio priest, broadcast anti-Semitic sermons to millions. And the American First Committee, which argued against the U.S. entry into World War II, became a platform for isolationists and fascist sympathizers alike. In speeches, some American First voices cited Ford as proof that Jewish bankers and foreign interests were dragging America into another war. Even though Ford himself tried to step back from politics after the lawsuit and backlash in the late 1920s, his earlier words lived on, recycled by those eager to find an American face for their prejudice. Henry Ford never formally endorsed Father Coughlin, but the two men shared Detroit as a base. They shared an obsession with blaming Jews for society's ills. Coughlin distributed the Protocol of Elders of Zion, the same fake text that Ford had circulated a decade earlier. The overlap between the Ford's newspaper writings and Coughlin's broadcast was too close to ignore. Together, they helped keep anti-Semitism alive in mainstream America discourse well into the 1930s. By the time World War II erupted, Ford tried to distance himself from the controversies. He issued a public apology in 1927 after being sued for libel, claiming he had not personally written the Dearborn Independent articles. But the damage was done, the words were already out there. In American homes, in Nazi libraries, in the speeches of demagogues across the country. And for decades afterward, the International Jew remained one of the most widely circulated anti-Semitic texts in the world. Henry Ford built cars that symbolized freedom, mobility, and the American dream. But he also built an intellectual foundation for hate, one that inspired Nazis abroad and emboldened extremists at home. It's a paradox that can't be neatly untangled. Because while Ford's assembly line transformed industry, his words and ideas gave legitimacy to some of the darkest currents in both America and world history.
Necessarily what you're talking about, Regil. I was just speaking in that we have the history of Ford and how it ties in is really important. And then, of course, the DHS putting out that really insane, this is how we want the capital area to look, with a whole bunch of Model Ts lined up the sidewalk, which I felt was so crazy.
Yeah. And the more I was looking into it, the more I was like, oh, like he's not a great person in general, but he spread a lot of like anti-Semitic stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And like every time people would buy a car, he would give them his like newspaper, or he's like it was like the Dearborn Independent newspaper that he bought, and it was just full of like anti-Semitic stuff, which was crazy.
So, Tabitha, I think what he's doing, by the way, is we're just talking and he's going to clip our audios and add it in to the show. Am I understanding that correctly, Regio?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're just kind of like chit-chatting. Is that kind of what we're doing?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. I wish I had listened more to the audio you sent. I'm sorry I wasn't able to, but if you can give us like a little just rundown of that.
Yeah. So I talked about in there about how when he first started, he became all this big industrialist in the US and made a ton of money and became influential. And then he went and bought the Dearborn Independent newspaper, and he published a bunch of anti-Semitic stuff against Jewish people, but also other minorities. And he
Mhm.
published a story called "The Learned Elders of Zion," which is a Russian anti-Semitic document about how they were going to be controlling everything underground, basically what Marjorie Taylor Greene believes in.
Yep.
But it was debunked, but he kept reporting it and reporting on it and reporting on it. And he did a bunch of volumes of it. And then it got sent over to Germany in the 1930s. And it was just spread like wildfire. And it was mentioned in Mein Kampf and all this different propaganda there. And they were like, oh, yeah, he's in the US, he's the man that's going to, bring back these ideologies, and he's going to be the one to bring fascism to the US. and that's when he gets the award from Germany right before the war starts. But then the war starts, and the government in Germany at the time is like, "Hey, we don't want foreign influences on our industry," so they kind of take over Ford in Germany. But it's not really sure how much they had control of the people. I mean, the company of Ford in Germany, because they were still getting the executives in the U.S. were still getting paid, and they were still getting reports, even though concentration camps were sending people to go work at Ford in Germany, and they were building trucks for the Weimar.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and it didn't Hitler refer to him as the only America with instinct for the true state of affairs, I think was the quote. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's absolutely insane. I mean, just the spread of misinformation, the fact that um, he promoted the protocol for elders,
yeah,
wild to me. And that's like a Russian text. And I'm sure you know that, Rajiel. So it's like a fraudulent Russian text that like revealed the Jewish plot for like dominating. And that's kind of where people are like, oh, Jewish people run the banks and the financial institutions. It kind of all stems from that false text from back then.
yeah,
And heavily promoted that.
yeah. It was in the newspaper that he owned. But even after World War II, all that text, the protocol, the learned elders of Zions that was debunked in Russia, ended up in his newspaper, which ended up in the Triple K or anti-Semitic groups in the U.S., and they still use it,
Right. Mm-hmm.
and it's still a big thing. And he's become like a folklore legend in that group in the U.S. right now.
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that, and par for the course, it's all been debunked. It kind of reminds me of modern day Fox Entertainment Network, where it's all debunked, and they, clearly said that Fox Entertainment said no rational person would believe what we say is fact, right? And people still do. They see it as Bible, right? Like that is their truth. It's the same concept with it was the Dearborn Independent, I believe, was the paper that he pushed out
Yeah,
or that it was his that he owned.
Yeah.
It's the correlation, not just, and I think I brought this up to you previously, Rigiel, how Ford gave Hitler a car
Mm-hmm.
just in the same fashion that Elon gave Trump a car
Exactly.
on the White House lot. It was this big thing. The similarities are so jarring, and if people knew history, they could see what is happening. I think that's what drives me crazy more than anything is we have the playbook. This is an open book test that we are failing on a daily basis.
Yeah, the pattern recognition is right there. It's literally right in front of us. And it, for some reason, it's almost like the way people see things is not the way they're actually being perceived, if that makes sense. Like we see it for what it is, but these other people that for some reason are seeing this alternate reality of what is being placed right in front of them. That to me is a hard sell. I mean, you can obviously see the White House being used as a car, show sale right in front of us is the same thing as what you just said in him giving the mustache man, a vehicle. And it's the gifting too. It's these big gifting with these big, corporations and stuff. And it's just so, I don't know, it's so crazy how it's just repeating itself right in front of us.
yeah, and it's kind of insane, like the fact that it was debunked before he published any of it, but yet nobody cared because he was the bigger voice. So basically, he just sat there and drowned out any opposition. But he was so desperate to get all this stuff out there that, like, one of his people that he hung out with talked about on a camping trip how he would just go off on rants about how the Jews are going to start another war or they're controlling the banks or they're the problem that started the um, Great Depression,
Mm-hmm.
but no one bothered to like call him on it, I guess. And
Right.
he did get sued for publishing that, and he would come out and he said like, "Hey, I'm sorry, I didn't have anything to do. I don't write the articles," but then continued to make sure that they were published.
Sounds so familiar.
Right, exactly. I was just going to say that. Like, I think what's so chilling is that, like, Henry Ford wasn't just like some fringe extremist. Like, back then, he was one of the most powerful and respected people in America because of his innovations and, the car industry and whatnot. And when someone with that kind of influence starts to push anti Semitic conspiracy theories, they become mainstream. And that's exactly what we're seeing
Exactly.
with
Exactly.
Trump and some of the most powerful voices that repeat what Trump says.
Mhm.
So and all these global elites that are pushing not just anti-Semitism, right? Because they're pushing more the others like Black and Brown people, LGBTQIA, people with disabilities. They're pushing that same kind of rhetoric. So like for like just like then, it's incredibly dangerous.
Yeah,
And I think what's scary is how easy it was done, right? Like you're saying, like it was debunked, completely debunked, like what RFK has put out there or anything. It's been shown that it was we use AI or that they fudge the numbers and they change the statistics and it's been debunked, and yet people still believe it because there is just this big following. Well, these people must be right because they're with the president, or these people must be right because they hold such a higher power in our political, government or whatever. And that's a scary thought because that's how easy this misinformation and these really dangerous rhetorics are spread. And we're seeing that happen in real time.
Yeah.
yeah, and he was sponsoring the America First movement in the U.S., which is when you go see those videos of the giant George Washington hanging in Madison Square Garden next to all that propaganda. That's the people who put that on. But even like now, the extremists in the U.S. on the right, the Triple K and all them, they use his text, but they've switched it from Jewish to globalist.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And then we heard that being used on the campaign trail like all the time. But it's the same thing. They just switched the word.
Right. And same thing with like, I believe that I feel the same with like Mandami, and what's going on with that is they're changing the lingo to now to go towards, his culture and kind of they're just whatever they can use to weaponize really is kind of how it's going instead of that specific. Now it's changing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think like the most uncomfortable part of all of it, I mean, it's all super uncomfy, but the most uncomfortable part is that that same rhetoric that they spread in newspapers is now being spread on social media, which we know has a larger reach. And the uh, although the platforms are different and there is a larger reach, it's still the same like dangerous rhetoric,
Right.
but just on a bigger scale. They're trying to normalize hate. And we know that in 1930s Germany, it didn't start with unaliving people at concentration camps, right? It started with the rhetoric. It started with the lies. It started with othering people. It started with, we need to be us first, and us only, just like the America first
Exactly.
rhetoric.
The isolation rhetoric.
Exactly. It's being spread on such a grand scale because of social media. It's not just a newspaper when you buy a car. It's not just the Dearborn Times. Like my family, when they immigrated here, immigrated to Dearborn. There's a huge Armenian population in Dearborn. And my grandpa retired from Ford, right? So the stories, that's the only reason I know the stories the way that I do, is because he lived it, right? It didn't change overnight. There was still that rhetoric. So it's sad.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the things that happened in Germany was like Ford gave them kind of a credibility because he was this huge rich industrialist. He had made it.
Yep.
And people were like, well, here's this guy with a bunch of influence in industry. Obviously, his ideology must be doing something right.
Right, exactly. And
Yeah.
everybody wants to achieve that, so they're going to follow along with it. Just the same as Trump saying, he's going to make it easier for the middle class, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. They're going to put $500 back in your. It's all just this rhetoric, and because you see someone who's got their Oval Office painted in Home Depot gold and they're building a ballroom, everybody's like, I want that. Like, I want this man to give me the promises he says. So we want to achieve that. And it's blatantly lying.
Right. It's like when like people think when someone with wealth and influence, when they spread lies, they're like, oh well, back then if Henry Ford believes it, maybe it's true. And then fast forward to now, well, somebody with wealth and influence, if Trump believes it, then it has to be true. And it's the people who don't, what I always say, don't have an original thought or don't have critical thinking, or you just don't know history, right? If you don't know history, you don't see it coming. That's why learning real history is so important.
Yeah, and I mean, you hear it all the time. They're like, "Oh, Trump, he's a real estate guy, and he's made millions doing it. He's such a successful businessman." So they use that as justification to why he is the way he is, and he must be doing something right. And they did the same thing with Ford in Germany. He's successful. He's built all these cars. He has all this money. Obviously, he must know something.
Honestly, Regil, I hear that a lot as MAGA talking points, right? So they'll say, like when he did the Liberation Day, right, and all the tariffs came out, and he was tariffing an island that had nothing but penguins, right? MAGA was like, well, he knows what he's. We're just gonna wait. He knows what he's doing. We trust him. He's got something up his sleeve. He's what is it they said? He's playing chess and they're playing checkers or whatever they said. And it's just like that right there should just tell you where they're at intellectually. To sit there and have proof in front that this man, they basically AI throwing tariffs all over the place, and they tariffed a place that didn't even exist, and they doubled down on it and showed that this was pointless. And MAGA was able to say, well, let's hold on. He's got something up his sleeve. Look what he's done with all his businesses. Just like you said, it's exactly the same talking points. It's wild, the similarities. Wild.
Yeah. I think it just reminds us that like dangerous rhetoric becomes normalized when people think that the person spreading it has some kind of power.
Yeah, and I think
Exactly.
it boils down to people think that if you're successful in one area, you're going to be successful everywhere. So
So
they'll
true.
follow blindly.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a part of the reason we're in the mess we're in is just people don't understand, like, hey, I could be good at one thing, but that doesn't mean I know everything.
Right. And I think
Like,
everybody is desperate right now to have somebody tell them what they need to do or what's going to make their life better, right? And so these people, like Tabitha said, without critical thinking, hear something so simplified one time like no tax on tips, and they think they're going to have thousands of dollars falling into their pockets or something like that. I mean, that's how simplified they hear it instead of actually doing the research and understanding what is actually at play. I find that to be just so disturbing for our country, watching everything happen, while we're trying to talk people into understanding what is actually happening. These people are just sitting by and letting it happen because they don't believe it's happening. They don't.
yeah,
I do believe, though, what Ford did prove to us is that lies can travel so quickly when money is put behind them, and it's exactly what we are up against right now.
oh yeah, and it's just when you let ideology be more important than because that's what he did is he made industry an ideologically thing. Like ideologically,
It's
his
crazy.
industry was focused around his ideology. In which case, just like we're seeing now, all these tech people are going and they're just bowing down to Trump. They're letting their industry be determined by someone else's ideology.
So true. It's just power and influence, and I think all these people are just at the end of the day, right? The working class is just uh, dirt to these people. We don't exist to these people. They want more power. They want more grifting. They'll do whatever they can to control the masses. And these tech bros that are combining with this MAGA movement is so scary because of exactly what you just said. And just like with Ford, with the ideology that comes with it and the influence that tech has in our country right now is very, very scary. Very scary.
Yeah, but there's some parallels there for sure.
Oh, there's so many parallels. I think the only difference is the way that the information is being spread. In my opinion, the only difference is the way it's being spread because Ford proved that lies can travel when you have money and power behind them, and that's exactly what we're up against today. But it's at such a grand scale because of the internet, because of social media,
Exactly.
television. For him, it was on a smaller scale, but still look what that small scale did, right? Just by him, right in the newspaper, and then Hitler saying, "Oh yeah, he's one of the only Americans with sense." It's just crazy, and it's scarier, I would say, because of social media and these platforms and people being sucked into this rhetoric on such a massive, massive scale.
And how quickly it spreads. I think like that's the difference. Like, yes, he was in the newspaper and it still had the influence that it had. And now we have all different social platforms, like you said. It's like a game of telephone. Someone reports on it and kind of flubs something a little bit different or makes something a little more extreme, then that person follows it and that person shares it and shares it and shares it. And then we have a younger generation that's also more involved in listening to it. And that's why we have like Turning Point and we have these younger people who are hearing all of this and soaking it in and believing the rhetoric and believing, okay, well, we want to be like powerful and we want to be, businessmen like Trump and like these people. So I guess we need to follow suit. That's terrifying.
Yeah, for sure. But if people had just paid attention in history, they would know this.
Should we be mad at history teachers or no? Just
Because listen, because a lot of us understand, right? A lot of us
Yeah.
chose to learn. A lot of us chose to know history and the correlations. And so, no, we can't be mad at teachers. We have to be mad at the fact. Let's be mad at Bush for no child left behind, first of all.
First of all, that part.
Like, um, people for not being curious, for not wanting to know more, for not understanding that we do learn from the past. And a lot of people don't understand that when we talk about anti-Semitism, all we do is think about Hitler. All we do is think about Hitler when it comes to 1930s Germany.
Yeah.
People don't realize that one of the most influential men in America was a huge part of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was a whole movement, and I think a lot of people are like, it can't happen here because it only happened in Germany. It never happened here.
I don't understand that thought process. We're literally taking every piece of art off of our streets, off of everywhere in Florida right now. That's one of the big things that Hitler talked about in going after the art and going after things like we're erasing things and it's happening right on our soil, right in front of us, turning everything black and white. They want things to be around the Model T. They want things to be where women had no say at all, period. And it's happening right in front of us. Dangerous.
It is. Any other thoughts?
I just, we, no, I think we think that hate comes from like the fringe, but if anything, if history shows us anything, it usually comes from the very top and the most powerful people who have influence, who help propaganda. And I think we all have to remember that hate is learned. And just like, you see children and children love up on everybody, right? They're friends with everybody when they start school.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a learned behavior. It's the same thing with adults. When they see powerful people, it can change their ideology.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I totally agree with that.
Yeah, and like I say, like hate is the only reason for hate is it's just a tool for control,
Mm-hmm.
and people don't realize that.
I also feel like hate a little bit shows a lot of insecurity as well.
Oh
If
yeah.
that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like it shows a lot of, there's a lot more there's a lot more going on there than just the hate for the one topic they may be speaking on or whatever. I think there's a lot of insecurities in that person that has so much hate for someone that doesn't affect their life or you know have any impact on them whatsoever. So there's a lot more to unpack there, but it's just it's sad to see our country literally repeating history. I mean, there's no fear mongering at this point. It's point blank happening.
Yeah, it's happening. And I do want to just tell you, Regina, I appreciate you doing this podcast so much because it's so important to know what parts of our history exactly align with what's happening right now.
Yes.
I don't believe enough people understand that. So I get so excited when a new episode comes out because I'm like, yeah, this is exactly what we need. We need it in our face. And it needs to blow up. Your podcast needs to be huge.
Yeah, and as uncomfortable it is too, right, Tabitha? Like, and it is uncomfortable. But the point is, you got to feel that uncomfortable feeling to learn history to understand, so we don't repeat it.
Yeah.
And we are repeating it. And how do we stop it? That's where we're at now. It is happening in real time. So
Well,
we
the big beautiful obituary would be how we stop it.
yes and no
Well,
because
that's true.
people will continue to spread the rhetoric, right? It's the
Yeah,
power.
that's true.
It is the powerful people that want to continue to stay in power who want us infighting each other all of the time because
Yes,
fighting each other, we're not paying attention to what they are doing to take.
that part, so important. Hmm.
I think the way you stop it is you just got to get people more intelligent on things. Like let people understand, hey, the only reason they're spreading hate is to control you. It's a tactic to make you look this way, while they steal from you the other side, kind of situation. And then as long as people think that it's fine to hate, they're going to keep this going.
Yeah, and I think it's going to get a lot worse before it's going to get better.
Yeah,
Right. Mhm.
but everybody's got to do something to keep history alive, especially right now. So that's the reason I started this podcast, is because they're going to try and remove as much as they can.
Yeah. And I think like in talking about like the Smithsonian and stuff and how they're trying to make it seem like our history is so bad and we don't want our kids to hate our country. Well, if we don't see what our country and what people in our country did, then what we're going to do is repeat the same behavior, which is happening right now, which is literally what they're trying to do by kidnapping brown people off the streets, giving people no due process, saying they're putting people in camps, but oh, wait, we're going to let them work on the farms. They just can't have any benefits. So it's insane to me how people don't see that factor of our country. Just because we had a bad history doesn't mean we can't prosper in the future. Doesn't mean we can't be progressive and we can't do things that are different to actually help our country thrive. I don't understand that people don't get that.
And erasing history doesn't make it better. I don't, you guys, I'm sure you know that in Germany, they're required by law to teach about the Holocaust in Nazi Germany and World War II. And they start learning around age 10 to 13 about their history. And they learn it in depth. There's no watering it down because they want to teach the students what they got wrong so they get things right in the future.
Exactly. Such a good point.
Kind of a little bit of a shameless plug, but I did an episode recently, and I think this is the history that is being erased very fast. Is there was concentration camps in the Confederacy
Hmm.
for Union soldiers, and it's just north of Mississippi in Georgia.
Mm.
But yet, no one's probably ever heard of it or ever even cared to look it up.
I saw the photos and I saw it. Yeah, it's disturbing. And I'm glad that you did that.
But they're erasing history, and we've already seen a lot of it's gone, and we're not going to get it back.
Right. That's just it. We're not going to get it back. I think that's the important thing of why your podcast is so needed right now is to educate people and also say, look, like they're whitewashing and they're changing our history so fast, so fast. And it's not like, oh, they took some papers away and how we can bring some papers back. It's not like that. And these young kids are, being brought up in this country where they're going to be taught things so differently. Their minds are going to be like just controlled in a way that you and I and Tabitha have never experienced. And it's our job to keep history alive, and it's our job to keep people aware of the similarities with our history and our present.
Absolutely. I also, I want to circle back to how it's taught in Germany. They're taught to understand not just the scale of the crimes committed by Hitler and the Nazis, but also the social factors that enabled those things to happen, like the propaganda, the economic hardship, blind obedience. I mean, this is what they're taught. This is what our students should be taught about things like slavery and everything, really, all the bad things we've done, coming over and conquering and unaliving all the natives. And this is how our history should be taught.
I agree. Like, don't celebrate Thanksgiving, to each their own, but like, know your real history.
Yeah, I agree.
I feel like, what our country is really good at? I feel like, and I say this a lot, is they put this like ribbon, like a gift. Like they take something that's so wretched and terrible and dehumanizing, and they just put a bow on it, and they make us think like, okay, this is all right. Now you're desensitized to this, so let's move on to the next thing. You know what I mean? And people don't take a second to even research or look into it to get the factual information on what happened with that. And if they did, they would look at our country a lot differently, I feel. And whether this administration wants to believe it or not, we're never great. We're never going to be great, especially with what's happening right now.
And Rachel, I want to know if you could do an episode about the McGraw books that we learned. Do you know the history of the McGraw books?
A little bit.
So those were the books that we were taught out of when we were in school.
Remember, like you get it had everything in it, right?
Oh, McGraw Hill?
McGraw Hill, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Do a deep dive into McGraw Hill and who the owner was and the publishers and things like that. I would love to look into that. And if you do an episode on that, please bring me back for it.
Okay.
I don't want to give it away until you look into it.
Okay, I'll start working on that one. But thank you guys for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us, Regil. And again, we're just so glad that you're doing a podcast like this. I haven't heard anything of anyone comparing what is happening in our country to the history of what has happened before, and it's so important. So thank you for having myself.
Yeah, thank you so much. We appreciate you, Regil.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you guys are actually doing something to change it.
We're sure trying.
One day at a time.
Yep, that's all we can do.
Okay, thank you guys for coming on.
Absolutely. Talk to you later, Regil.
Bye.
Bye.